thank the committee for the invitation to participate in this. I'm going to try to do this in 10 minutes to show you some slides as well. And I feel right now that I'm going to fail miserably. But let me explain the title, Valley of Dry Bones. When I thought about the title, I probably should have dealt more with the response to the query. Most of you, if you're familiar with the book of Ezekiel, this is where I got this. And what God asked him was, can these bones live? Then he told him to do something. And this is where I'm coming from with this. Let me just start reading this. But pay attention to the slides. I want you to notice, and I got all these slides from the Housing Authority records, and notice how pristine they are. And for those of you that are residents long-time residents of North Nashville, pay attention to the contrast between what is portrayed and what actually materialized. Okay. One of the most compelling stories in American history is the transition of African Americans from enslaved persons to free persons. Although freedom arrived in waves for the 4 million African Americans living in the South in 1865, and the ways in which they and their northern counterparts sought to define it varied throughout the period of Reconstruction and the early decades of Jim Crow. One common desire they all shared was that for land. Indeed, African Americans hewed to a Jeffersonian idea of liberty, one that equated land ownership with freedom. Many free persons believed land ownership afforded them the opportunity to explore economic pursuits that had been heretofore forbidden, and the security of knowing that the failure of a business venture away from their homes would not be a catastrophic event for their families. Thus, when thousands of fugitive slaves left their homes in Middle Tennessee and beyond for Nashville, they arrived in the city with a conviction that their lives would change for the better. A contraband camp around Fort Dillon, a small fort constructed by the Union Army during its occupation of Nashville, established what would become the first African American community around Jefferson Street in the North Nashville area. This community, in addition to becoming one of the first in the city whose children would not have to bear the generational curse of enslavement, would be first-hand witnesses to the rise of higher education for African Americans, as well as a long, protracted struggle for civil rights. In 1860, there were 14,790 African Americans living in Davidson County. And of that number, only 1,214 were free. But by 1870, largely as a result of the war and mass exodus of African Americans from their homes around the state, that number had swollen to 25,412. These groups tended to settle in areas that had a strong Union Army presence during the war, casting their lots in places that bore names still familiar to many Nashville residents today. African Americans settled in areas such as Edge Hill, Trimble Bottom, and Black Bottom. African Americans in these areas created communities with shared identities, cultures, and aspirations for the future. Paradoxically, their successful realization of their hopes and dreams, combined with the unwillingness of a greater North Nashville community to provide basic services to help them maintain these communities, would have a disastrous effect on these neighborhoods' survival and well-being less than 2 years after slavery, 2 decades after slavery. Nashville began building public housing as early as the 1930s to deal with its growing number of slums in the city. In its 1951 report, the Nashville Housing Authority defines slums as areas consisting primarily of houses which were built many years ago. Noting that most of the homes were poorly erected or, quote, constructed of inferior materials, the organization suggested that these quickly built homes were created for low-income families. Negligence and the age of the homes in the areas were also contributing factors to the rise of slums in Nashville, according to the Housing Authority. Although many of the homes located in these areas were, when they were first constructed, considered pretentious and even luxurious. In their efforts to determine the cause of the expansion of city slums, the organization concluded that the growth of the city, industrial expansion, and white flight contributed to the neighborhood's demise. However, the report fails to establish any causal relationship between Jim Crow, geography, or limited economic opportunity and the rise of slums in the city. Choosing, however, to focus on the moral deficiencies of its residents as being the cause of the problem. Boasting that Nashville was one of the earliest cities to have public housing developments constructed, the optimistic report suggested that providing public housing for the residents of the slums would be beneficial for all residents of the city. Indeed, public housing provided Nashville with an opportunity to accomplish two of its sorely desired goals. The construction of public units enabled the city to move its poorest residents out of the areas that the city argued had become notorious for crime, vice, and poor health, into spaces that would be characterized as clean, comfortable, and family-oriented. What perhaps more important to Nashville was the opportunity these units afforded the city and its developers to lay claim to the land vacated by these residents. This was especially true of the 95 acres that lay adjacent to the Capitol building. The first public housing project created exclusively for African Americans appeared in Nashville in 1937. And by 1951, it would be one of 5 constructed to house African American families. Other housing projects for African Americans in existence or under development by 1951 included Andrew Jackson Court, James C. Mayberry, Edge Hill, and John Henry Hill, and the Preston Taylor homes. Once completed, the Housing Authority estimated that public housing could accommodate an additional 1,200 families. The Housing Authority promised an almost idyllic life for the residents who call these areas homes, with rents that average just over $30 a month. The slide that you see is one of the Preston Taylor homes. And during my research on this, I engaged in a lot of oral history, and I heard a lot of horror stories about Preston Taylor. I don't know what they look like when they finally got around to maturity now, but certainly they didn't look like that. One of the things that the Housing Authority used to sell these homes is the fact that they created a gymnasium. And they argued that public housing had more of a role than just to house residents, but it was to create a better life for them.